Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 752 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. And in today's episode, wanted to kind of turn our attention to the upcoming March 3rd trade deadline. You know, we've talked a little bit here and there about potential moves that the Rangers could look to make. You know, I've kind of thrown out the idea of Patrick Kane because, you know, that's always being kicked around on social media. Kane kind of a divisive player as far as Ranger fans are concerned, and as far as the possibility of them potentially bringing him in, most likely as a rental this season. He's one player we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss two other players as well. And like I said, we've kind of on and off been talking about what the Rangers could look to add at the trade deadline. A right winger certainly comes to mind. Another thing might be, you know, a depth defenseman, or, you know, I know some Ranger fans really like Jacob Chychrun, so maybe at some point we'll talk about him as well. But, you know, we got a little bit of time between now and the trade deadline, and I thought what we could do is kind of do a couple of deep dives from time to time between now and the deadline. And we're going to start with three players today. As I already mentioned, Patrick Kane is one of them. The other two are Bo Horvat and Vladimir Tarasenko. And I'm not focusing on these players because I think it's necessarily like these are the three players that the Rangers must get. It's not really a list like that. At a certain point, you know, once I have time to really think about it and kind of, you know, do a little bit of research and just kind of envision how certain players might fit with this Ranger team, then maybe as we're getting a little bit closer to the deadline, I'll kind of do like a ranking episode where I'll kind of do like my top 5 favorite New York Ranger trade deadline targets. We're not there yet. Like I said, in the interim, we're basically just going to do an overview of a couple of different players, some guys that I think at least could make some sense for the Rangers, and guys that have been heavily rumored. That's kind of the theme of today's episode, because these three players that I just mentioned, as far as, you know, Ranger fans are concerned, their names come up probably about as much or more than any other player as far as guys that might be available at the deadline this season. And I think in general, going into the deadline this year, the Rangers are going to be looking for players, much like they did last year. They're going to be looking for players that are on expiring contracts, guys that are pending UFAs, and guys that they, I don't want to say definitely won't re-sign, but probably will not re-sign. You know, we saw what happened last year. All the guys they brought in as rentals turned out to be just that. They were rentals, and they were on their way. And it's not because the Rangers, you know, wouldn't want to necessarily re-sign somebody like Patrick Kane or Bo Horvat or Vladimir Tarasenko. It's the very simple fact that they probably won't be able to afford to do so, barring something completely unforeseen here. But without any further ado, want to talk about the first candidate, the first player that seems likely to be traded this season. I guess you never really know for sure because, you know, Patrick Kane does have a no-move clause, but I would imagine the Blackhawks, you know, they're definitely going to need to rebuild. I mean, they're a mess right now. It has not been a pretty season for them. So I would think they would look to trade Patrick Kane and get whatever they can for him, and from their point of view, try to create some kind of a bidding war among contending teams, which might include the Rangers. Kane has some control of his destination, though, because he has a full no-move clause, and we'll talk about that and how that could affect things in just a second. But, you know, I think these Patrick Kane to the Rangers rumors that we've kind of been hearing on and off basically ever since the offseason, they are going to persist and persist and persist until Patrick Kane is actually traded to the Rangers, or until Patrick Kane is traded somewhere else, or until the trade deadline comes and goes, and he's still with the Chicago Blackhawks after all. But it's a rumor that's going to be out there, and obviously a lot of fans have some very strong opinions on this situation. You know, everybody knows about Patrick Kane. I mean, one of the most famous players in the league, and his resume speaks for itself. But I do want to kind of just go through his career numbers really quick, and then we'll talk about, you know, how he could fit in with this New York Ranger team. But yeah, I mean, a veteran at this point, 34 years old, 1,445 career regular season games, 438 goals, 770 assists. So he's got 1,208 points in 1,145 games, a career plus-minus of plus 18. He has averaged 20 minutes and 18 seconds of ice time per night, 251 block shots, 296 hits, and the big one, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. He's won the Conn Smythe, the Art Ross, the Hart, the Ted Lindsay, one time apiece for all of those awards. He's been on the NHL's first All-Star team 3 times and a 9-time All-Star member, and most recently doing so in 2020. And it is worth noting, you know, after going through all those accolades there, though, that Patrick Kane is statistically having the worst season of his career. He's played in 38 games, only 8 goals for Patrick Kane so far this year, and 20 assists. He's also a minus 25 which is also the worst of his career. Some of this can certainly be attributed to the fact that the Blackhawks, as I mentioned a second ago, are absolutely terrible. He doesn't really have a lot of help around him. And you do wonder, this is a guy that's won multiple Stanley Cups, and this team is just dead and buried in the standings, and it looks pretty hopeless. I don't know that any player is above having his motivation being affected at least a little bit in a situation that's as hopeless as the Chicago Blackhawks are right now. And he sees the writing on the wall. He probably understands the fact that the Blackhawks will eventually or should eventually look to trade him, and maybe he's just counting down the days until that happens. He does have the full no move, as I mentioned. But obviously his numbers are down a little bit more, and as I mentioned a second ago, he is 34 years old. One thing, though, that is certainly in his favor, and I think the reason why a lot of Ranger fans would love to add Patrick Kane, among several reasons, is the very simple fact that he is a right winger. And right wing, when you look at the Rangers right now, that certainly seems to be the weak spot. They've got good centers, Mika and Trocheck. That's about as good of a 1-2 punch as you've got in this league. Philip Hedl obviously emerging a little bit this season. Left wing, Kreider, Panarin, and Lafreniere. So, they're pretty set there. And even at defensemen, they got 5 really good defensemen. I know people get on Jacob Trouba from time to time, but as far as their top 5 defensemen are concerned, they're set there. And even Ben Harper emerging a little bit as the 6th defenseman. And I don't think I really need to say anything about goalie Igor Shesterkin, one of the absolute best on the planet. So, it's right wing. If you want to identify a weakness, just at least in terms of the positions on the ice, I think it would certainly be a right wing for the Rangers. And if Patrick Kane comes in, you figure he's probably going to slot onto the Panarin line. And it's worth pointing out, of course, that they spent 2 seasons together. Artemi Panarin entered the league with the Chicago Blackhawks, and they were line mates. Obviously, they combined for some really, really nice goals. And there was a thing earlier this year where before these two teams played each other during the pregame skate, Artemi Panarin was, kind of playfully flipping the puck at Patrick Kane. They got the pucks out there during pregame, and he was hitting him with the puck. Not hard, obviously, just kind of flipping the puck at him. But, by all accounts, those two are still pretty tight. And Artemi Panarin doesn't have a say in this process, but I get the feeling that he would probably welcome Patrick Kane with open arms if there is a reunion this year, and if Patrick Kane is able to join the New York Rangers and these teams are able to come to some kind of an agreement, and Patrick Kane gets shipped over to the New York Rangers. One other thing that I wanted to mention, Patrick Kane, as I mentioned, and he has this in common with the other 2 players that we're going to talk about in today's episode, has a full no-move clause. He's in the final year of an 8-year, $84 million per season contract. That's an annual cap hit of $10.5 million. You figure that if this trade is going to happen, it's probably going to also come with some salary retention by the Chicago Blackhawks, which will probably cause them to ask the Rangers for a little bit more if they're still paying half of his money. And that kind of brings me into a couple other things I wanted to talk about here. The no-move clause. Now, Patrick Kane, if he was going to be traded to the New York Rangers, he would have to approve that deal, just like he would have to approve any deal. I would imagine that he probably would. If you're Kane, I don't see really what the point would be of sticking around with the Chicago Blackhawks for an extra half season when, they're not going to make the playoffs. There's no way. And he's going to be a free agent after the year. Maybe he re-signs with them, but he's getting a little bit older now. He's going to turn 35 next season. And how old is he going to be before the Blackhawks are even able to, contend for a playoff spot again? So I would imagine he'd be willing to waive the no-move clause, go to a contending team and try to get himself a 4th Stanley Cup. And with the Rangers, I don't see why he wouldn't want to go there. He's got Artemi Panarin. As I just mentioned, they were pretty tight. They'd probably be on the same line. Rangers, obviously, a young up-and-coming team that had a nice run last year. I would imagine Patrick Kane, and I can't speak for him. I don't know what goes through his head, but I think he would embrace a challenge like that of coming to New York, another big stage. Chicago's a big stage, New York an even bigger stage, and having the opportunity to, potentially lead this team to a Stanley Cup championship. Patrick Kane, if that were to happen, Patrick Kane would become a Ranger legend, and he'd probably only be here for half a season, but he really would be. It would be that impressive, and it would be that important, and he would be held in very high regard by most New York Ranger fans. I would say that for sure. I mentioned he's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Very impressive playoff numbers, 136 games, 52 goals, 80 assists. So 132 points in 136 games. He had the Game 6 overtime winner against the Flyers in the finals, and that gave the Blackhawks the Stanley Cup. So, I mean, he's definitely a playoff performer. Hasn't really been in the playoffs all that much the last few years. Just 9 playoff games for Patrick Kane in the last 5 seasons. And even those 9 games, that was all during the COVID season when the Blackhawks were a 12 seed and they let pretty much everybody into the playoffs. So yeah, it's been a while since he's been in the playoffs, but there's no reason to think that he would not deliver when the lights are at their brightest, because he's done that in the past. That is for sure, leading his team to 3 Stanley Cups. And as far as, what the return could be, I was looking at the Blackhawks on Cap Friendly, and I know that they've stockpiled a lot of draft picks. Even I didn't realize how many they had. Over the next 2 seasons combined, the Blackhawks have 12 picks in the first 3 rounds combined. They'll have 2 picks in all of those rounds. So 2 first-round picks this year, 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks, and the year after that, once again, 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, 2 third-rounders. Now, on one hand, you can never have enough draft picks when you're a rebuilding team. On the other, they have so many draft picks already. I would think that they would want prospects rather than more draft picks for the Rangers. Can't speak for them, don't know that for sure, but at a certain point, I mean, look at all the draft picks they have. What are you even going to do with all these guys? So I would think they would want a prospect, and if I'm the Rangers, I'm not going to budge on giving up somebody like Hedl or Kakko or Lafreniere. Those are the building blocks for the Rangers going forward. The only way that I could see the Rangers maybe budging there is if they feel like they are not going to have enough cap space to re-sign all those guys. Like, take Hedl and Lafreniere, for example, because they're both RFAs, going to need new contracts, and the Rangers, who's to say for sure if they can afford both of them long term? If they come to the determination that they cannot afford one of those 2 players, then maybe that becomes an option where you deal one of them in a package for Patrick Kane. Kane's obviously going to walk after the season as well, but you can make yourself better in the short term, and you'd only be trading away a player who you do not believe that you will be afford to keep. Although I think the Rangers probably will do something to try to keep both Hedl and Lafreniere, but we'll see. It's hard to know for sure what it's going to entail. And I mentioned the no-move clause, and obviously Patrick Kane is going to have a big say in where he goes, and if he mentions or makes it clear to the Blackhawks that he only wants to go to the Rangers, or maybe the Rangers and just one other team, whatever it might be, then he kind of controls his own destiny there, and the Blackhawks might be able to, or might have to just take whatever they can get from the New York Rangers. And if Kane says that he'll only go to the Rangers, and I have no idea if he would do that or not, but if he says that, Blackhawks lose a lot of leverage, and once again, it's a situation where they would probably just have to take, I don't want to say nothing from the Rangers, but not as much as you should be able to get for a player of Patrick Kane. So we'll see how the whole thing shakes out. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. I know Kane's numbers are down this year, and he is 34 years old. He's getting up there a little bit, but man, he comes over to the Rangers. He is immediately the best right winger that they have. Proven playoff winner, proven playoff performer, and getting him and Panarin back together, that would be something else as well. So, I think, it's one of those things, the price has to be right, but I am intrigued by Patrick Kane. And, like I said, in a future episode, I'll kind of rank my favorite trade targets. I'm not there yet, but, at first glance here, if the price is right, I think the Rangers have to do their due diligence as it pertains to possibly acquiring Patrick Kane. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second, talk about a couple of other players that the Rangers might look to target. But first, got to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league, from pro football to the NHL to basketball and the upcoming MLB season. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So we go from a player on a non-contending team to another player on a non-contending team, and that would be Bo Horvat, quite a bit younger than Patrick Kane. He is just 27 years old. He has a cap hit of $5.5 million, and he is in the final year of a 6-year, $33 million deal with the Vancouver Canucks. He will be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, as many of the players that we spotlight in these segments will be, because I just get the feeling the Rangers are going to be looking for rentals and not guys that they have to pay past the end of this season. But we'll see. You never know for sure. With Horvat, unlike Kane, He does not have a no-move clause of any kind, so the Canucks can trade him anywhere, and he has absolutely no say in the matter. I mean, maybe they would go to him and try to find out, like, is there a place you would like, or is there a place that you wouldn't like, and try to do right by their captain. But there's no guarantees. They might just strike whatever deal they can and get the best return that they feel like they can get. Horvat has played all 9 seasons of his NHL career with the Canucks. Debuted at age 19 in 2014-2015. He has now played in 615 regular season games. Horvat in his career with 200 goals and 214 assists. So that would be 414 points in 615 games. And as I mentioned, will be a UFA at the end of the season. He was an all-star in 2017 for what that's worth, and just been a really solid player for the Vancouver Canucks overall. He, as I mentioned, has played his entire career there, and to go through the rest of his stats, average 18 minutes and 30 seconds of ice time per night, 410 block shots, 546 hits, a face-off success rate at 53.8%, and he has won more than half of his face-offs in all 9 seasons in the league. So the Rangers, after struggling badly there in that department for years and years and years, finally have some good face-off guys, and if they were to acquire Bo Horvat, they would have another one. The season that he's currently having might be the best of his career to this point. He had never been a point-per-game player until this season, or at least so far this season. He's played in 43 games, scored 30 goals. He has 18 assists, so 48 points in 43 games. He's got 30 goals this season, as I mentioned, which is just 1 goal behind his previous career high. He set his career high last year with 31 goals, so he's having a heck of a season. As a quick side note here, though, I wanted to mention the Rangers and the Canucks and their wheelings and dealings as it pertained to JT Miller last season, because the Canucks basically wanted a king's ransom for JT Miller. Now, I was intrigued by the possibility of maybe a reunion between the Rangers and Miller. Miller's got the position flexibility, and obviously somebody that could have, maybe slotted into top 6 role, or at the very least a middle 6 role for the Rangers last year. But negotiations just didn't seem to go very well between the Rangers and the Canucks. And the reason I bring this up is it's the same 2 teams here. So if the Rangers and Canucks were nowhere close on a deal for JT Miller, then it's possible that these 2 franchises just don't see eye to eye when it comes to potentially trading players between themselves, and it might be difficult for the Rangers and Canucks to strike a deal for somebody like Bo Horvat after, again, by all accounts, they were miles apart as far as, what the return should be for JT Miller last season. And as far as Miller goes, they end up signing him to an extension, 5 years, $26.25 million. And he's had all kinds of problems this year, calling out the fans and just being really testy with the media. There was that incident where he was screaming at his goalie. So I like the idea of the Rangers maybe bringing him back just as a rental. I wanted no part of him signing an extension with the Rangers, which probably would not have happened. But the Canucks seem to have a little bit of a mess on their hands with JT Miller at this point. So I just bring that up once again because the Rangers and Canucks were so far apart last season. I don't know if they're going to find common ground as it pertains to a player like Bo Horvat, but only time will tell there. As I mentioned, something else that I think Horvat brings to the table is some leadership. Obviously, the Canucks thought highly enough of him to make him their captain in 2019. He was also their alternate captain back in 2017. And something that I like about him as far as his fit with the Rangers is Horvat is basically a sniper, and kind of like around this time last year, it feels like the Rangers are missing that, at least to a degree. The Rangers last year, the move that they made heading toward the trade deadline was to acquire Frank Vatrano, and nobody saw that coming because he came from the Panthers, and you don't see 2 contending teams usually strike a deal like that, but they did. And Vatrano, not a superstar player, but the one thing that he brings to the table is just a wicked shot and the willingness to use that shot. The Rangers, they got a lot of guys that are pass-first players, a lot of playmakers on the team. Horvat, it seems like, is something of a sniper, and so I think he could be a nice complementary player for the Rangers. It's really nice that, if they brought him in, he would probably just be the third-line center. And, man, as far as centers go, Bo Horvat centering your third line, that's about as good of a third-line center as you're going to have in this league. And you might hear that and wonder, okay, well, what happens to Filipino? I think that move, what would probably happen is the Rangers acquire Bo Horvat, he centers the third line, and that bumps Filipino from center on the third line to right wing on the third line. And I mentioned this, a long time ago. I just like the idea of Filipino on the wing, more so than center. I gave up on it because the Rangers just weren't going to make that move. Or, Hedl's played some wing here and there, but it's not a move that they've gone to consistently. And I don't think he's played wing a single time this season. They have him at center despite his less than 40% success rate on the faceoff circle. So, faceoffs, they're amplified in the playoffs. And if you bring in a Bo Horvat, now he's centering the third line. And let's see, I have his numbers right here this season. 55.9% success rate on the faceoff circle for Bo Horvat. And as I mentioned, he's never been below 50% for his entire career. So now you go from a faceoff liability in Filip Chytil to a guy who excels in that department in Bo Horvat. And Bo Horvat and Filip Chytil probably playing on the same line then on the third line with Filip Chytil once again at the right wing. As far as playoff experience for Bo Horvat, doesn't have a lot of it, just 23 games. 17 of those occurred in 2019, 2020. And in those 23 games, he's got 11 goals and 5 assists. Limited, sample size, obviously. And, that's just more of a product of the Canucks not really being all that good in recent seasons. I mean, let's just call it like it is. But yeah, I think he'd be a great fit for the Rangers. As far as what you would have to give up, it's tough to say. There might be teams that are looking to not only deal for Bo Horvat, but also then extend him. And if that's the case, teams with more cap space than the Rangers have, they might be willing to pay more of a price to acquire Bo Horvat than the Rangers are willing to pay. But, at first glance here and just kind of doing some research here and just kind of talking through it with you guys on today's episode, I do like Bo Horvat. We'll see if anything comes to fruition here. I'm a little bit skeptical because, like I mentioned, the Rangers and Canucks were just light years apart as far as a potential Miller deal this past season, JT Miller. But, we'll see. Fingers crossed that, maybe they can get something done or that the Rangers will eventually strike some kind of trade that's worthwhile and really improves this team at or near the trade deadline this season. But I think Bo Horvat, his name's going to keep coming up, and you got to figure pretty good chance he's going to be on the move at some point between now and the deadline. But we're going to keep everything rolling. We're going to talk about one more right winger for the day, and that is going to be Vladimir Tarasenko, and we will talk about him in just a second. Okay, so Tarasenko, I swear, this guy has been on the trade block since like 2007, and I realized he wasn't actually in the NHL at that time, but it just feels like every year, and a lot of times the Rangers are connected, but it feels like every year we're talking about something with Tarasenko where, him and the organization, the St. Louis Blues organization, aren't seeing eye to eye. I know that when they went with Ryan O'Reilly as the center, that Tarasenko wasn't exactly thrilled with that decision. There's times where it seems like the Blues are looking to trade him. There's times where Tarasenko has requested a trade. Obviously, he won the Stanley Cup with them back in 2019. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like it's been a little bit of a bumpy road between Tarasenko and the Blues, particularly over the last couple of seasons here. But, the guy's had a really nice career for himself. Debuted in 2012, 2013. He was 21 years old at that time. And for all the ups and downs and trials and tribulations that he's had with the St. Louis Blues, he has now been there for 11 seasons. And like I said, won the Stanley Cup with them back in 2018, 2019. 640 career regular season games, 262 goals, 291 assists, so 553 points in 640 games, and he is also a plus 62. This season, and we got to keep in mind before we do his stats for the season that Tarasenko has missed some games with a hand injury. More on that in a second, by the way. But this season, Tarasenko skated in 34 games with the Blues, 10 goals, 19 assists, so 29 points in the 34 games. He is also a minus 13, averaging 17 minutes and 29 seconds of ice time per night, and also 14 block shots and 40 hits. So his numbers are down a little bit this season, and obviously dealing with the hand injury right now. The report, though, is that he could be back in about a week, so you got to figure the Blues will probably look to deal him with him also being an impending UFA. But last year was one of the best seasons of his career. 34 goals and 48 assists, and a career-high 82 points last season. And as I already mentioned, a former Stanley Cup champion. He has twice made the NHL's second All-Star team, and he's been an All-Star 4 times, most recently actually this season. So obviously a good player, but there are some things that complicate Tarasenko and his potential fit with the Rangers. For starters, with the Blues, you got to start here. Unlike the Blackhawks, who might look to trade Patrick Kane, and unlike the Canucks, who might look to trade Bo Horvat, the Blues are still within striking distance of a playoff spot. They currently have 45 points. The last 2 teams into the Western Conference playoffs this year, and the teams that would be the 2 wild cards are the Flames and the Oilers. They both have 51 points. So the Blues within striking distance, just 6 points behind both of those 2 teams. All it really takes is a little bit of a run, a little bit of a hot streak, and just like that, you're back in playoff positioning. So they may not necessarily force a trade of Tarasenko if they overtake one of those teams, or if they get close enough where they feel like they're going to make the playoffs. They certainly would not have to force a Tarasenko trade in a situation such as that. As I already mentioned, another complication here, the fact that Tarasenko right now is suffering from a hand injury, and he's somebody that has had his fair share of injuries over the years here. He had a shoulder injury, seems to be over that. And this past season, last year, he played 75 games, but the 2 seasons before that, 24 games and 10 games. So there are some red flags as far as Tarasenko's injury history is concerned. You certainly don't want to give up something significant, and then 2 games into his Ranger tenure, Tarasenko's out for the season. That would not look good at all, especially when you consider that other players are certainly going to be available at the deadline, as there are every season. One other thing is that Tarasenko, with Gallant, he wants a team that's going to be aggressive on the forecheck, get in there and go to work. That's not really Tarasenko's game, or at least that's my understanding. I don't watch the St. Louis Blues night in and night out, but that's always kind of been his MO. Maybe his offensive skills are enough to compensate for that, and the Rangers would look past, the fact that he's not the most aggressive forechecker on the planet. And as I already mentioned, he's had some issues with the St. Louis Blues front office from time to time. I'm not too worried about that, though, because if the Rangers brought him in, you got to believe it is strictly as a rental. So Tarasenko would get here, he'd be in a new locker room. I'm sure he would want to make a good impression on his teammates and get out there and go to work. He's got a chance to win another Stanley Cup, and then he'll hit free agency right after that. I don't think he's going to come to a new team and clash with the front office and the coaches, hurt his own free agent market in the upcoming offseason, and limit his chances of potentially winning a Stanley Cup with the New York Rangers. Just, want to throw that out there. He's had his issues, but again, I cannot possibly foresee him acting up for all those reasons that I just mentioned. As far as the good with Vladimir Tarasenko, as I mentioned before with Horvat, something of a sniper here. He's got a nasty shot, and the Rangers, I think for sure they're going to look for a right winger, which Tarasenko is. And I think on top of that, one of the biggest things you want from the right winger that the Rangers are going to acquire is somebody who can and will shoot the puck and has a nasty shot. And I think Tarasenko certainly fits that description. And once again, we mentioned this with Patrick Kane. Another thing, though, working in Tarasenko's favor, as it will work in the favor of, basically anybody that the Rangers are looking to trade for, any right winger, is that that's where the Rangers are weak. The Rangers could use some help there. And so I would imagine the Rangers, just given his position, right wing, that alone will increase whatever interest the Rangers have in Tarasenko. And it's possible that maybe Drury's not really looking at Tarasenko or any of these guys that I just mentioned as options, but I would think he would do his due diligence. And I just feel like if you play right wing and you can bring something valuable to the table, that alone makes you more valuable to this New York Ranger team. As far as, a fit for the Ranger lineup, I'm kind of torn between, if they were to acquire Tarasenko, do you put him, at first I said probably the second line. He's out there with Trocheck and with Panarin. But, given the fact that Tarasenko isn't really known for defense and isn't really known as being an aggressive forechecker and a board warrior or anything like that, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to put him with the first line with Mika and Kreider, because they are both known as good defensive forwards. Mika will do a lot of the dirty work, and maybe he would fit better there. And then you put Kakko with the second line with Trocheck and Panarin. Although, as soon as I say that, I don't want Kakko moving away from Mika and Kreider because he's played well recently, the best hockey of his NHL career, and so I wouldn't really want to ruin that or take that away. But another thing that I think is true of Tarasenko, I don't know this for sure. We've been surprised by, things like this in the past. I don't think that the Blues' asking price for Tarasenko would be as high as, say, the Blackhawks for Patrick Kane or the Canucks for Bo Horvat. And again, you never know for sure. We try to project these things and, what this free agent is going to sign for, how many years he's going to get and how much money, and what this guy's going to be traded for and what the return is going to be. We can do that until we're blue in the face, and we do that until we're blue in the face. But with all that said, you never know for sure how it's going to go. But at first glance, I don't think Tarasenko gets as much of a return package as either of the two aforementioned players. And so, maybe that is appealing to the Rangers. They don't have to give away one of their top prospects. I saw an article not too long ago where, they were talking about Ranger trade targets, and he was mentioned as one of them. And hypothesized that maybe an Andrew Kopp type of package would be appropriate in exchange for Tarasenko. So if that was the case, I think that's something to definitely think about. It's not an overwhelming package to give up. I know you don't want to just be throwing away draft picks left and right, but if you have a chance to make your team better and you feel like you can win a Stanley Cup, I think you owe it to yourself to do exactly that. Draft picks, they might turn out well, they might not. It's as simple as that. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. And with Tarasenko, we already know that we're getting a good player and somebody who would undoubtedly make this team better and help them in an area where they are, at least a little bit weak right now. And to just run through the right wings real quick, Kakko's playing a lot better this season. You've got Kravtsov, who there's some metrics that are in his favor, but the points just haven't piled up despite him playing with Panarin and with Trocheck. VZ, really nice depth piece, but the upside is limited. Gauthier playing better this season than he ever has. But he's injured right now, and who's to say if the Rangers are ever going to really trust him in a prominent spot. So, yeah, right wing, I would say, is definitely the weakness and an area where the Rangers will look to improve at the deadline. We'll see if it's, Kane or Tarasenko. Obviously, Bo Horvat's a center, but, we'll continue kind of checking in and do episodes like this from time to time where we kind of just do a deep dive on certain potential trade targets for the New York Rangers. This is a lot of fun, though, and again, we're just kind of scratching the surface here. I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see who the Rangers might target, what rumors start to emerge, who seems likely, who seems unlikely, as far as players that the Rangers have their eye on going into the deadline. But it's going to be a lot of fun, probably a little bit stressful as well, as trade deadline day always is. But the Rangers did a heck of a job at the deadline last year, and we hope for more of the same this year. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.